In today's class, we are doing the concluding part of the chapter, The Mauryan Empire. So, today we will be doing the district administration, the different revenues which were collected, and the military administration. And we will finally conclude today's class with Ashoka's Dhamma. So, first, when we are talking about the district administration, in the previous class, we had already talked about the central level administration and the provincial level administration. So, like I had told you, that it was a decentralized structure. There was a center, there were provinces, then there were districts and villages. So, the districts, they were called Janpadas, and they were looked after by more or less the same officers who were there in the provinces. So you have already studied about these officers, Pradeshika, Rajuka and Yukta. You remember, Pradeshikas were the ones who collected the taxes, Rajukas were the ones who performed the revenue functions, and Yukta were the treasurers. So these, apart from the provinces, they also looked after the administration in the districts. Which brings us to the last part of administration, which is the administration at the city level. So there were many important cities in the Mauryan Empire, such as Magad's capital Patliputra. So even today, like, we have some special facilities for metropolitan cities like Delhi and other such places. So similarly, Patliputra, being a very large city, it had its own administrative system. And some other important larger cities like Takshila and other such cities also had it. So here the head of the city was called a Nagaradhyaksha. So Nagar ka Adhyaksh is Nagaradhyaksha. And Megasthenes mentioned that in Patliputra, there was a Nagaradhyaksha and he headed a committee of 30 members. These 30-member committees, they were divided into 6 subcommittees, like I have shown you in the picture. So there were total members, and there were 5 members in 6 of these subcommittees each. And each one of them, they dealt with a different thing. So one body, it dealt with the industries in the Mauryan period. The second one talked about the needs of foreign travelers. The third one, it talked about manufacture and sales of goods to check on the quality of the goods being manufactured. The fourth one, it registered birth and death certificates. The fifth one, it collected taxes at 10% of the produce. And the last one looked after the transport in the Mauryan period. So you can see it is similar to what municipality does today in the modern cities. In ancient times, these cities have 30-member committee and the 6 subcommittees which looked after the different needs of the Mauryans. So this is all about the administrative part. Now we are talking about the revenue. What type of revenue was collected? So revenue, you need to know, that is a very, very important source for running the affairs of a state. So the Mauryans also had a very comprehensive, very detailed sort of revenue system. And out of these, there are 2 revenues which were very, very important. So first one is called Bhaga and the other one is called Bali. Bhaga is actually an agricultural tax which is collected on the produce on agriculture or the number of cattle that is possessed by a particular person. And this was fixed at 1/6 of the total produce, or 1/6 of the total possession that a person had. So supposingly, if I am growing some crops, then 1/6 of that I had to give as Bhaga, as an agricultural tax to the government. And similarly, some scholars like Vincent Smith and Shama Shastri, remember R. Shama Shastri who had found the Kautilya book. So they mention another tax called Bali, which was like a religious tribute. Why we say tribute? Because probably it was a voluntary tax. It was not given forcibly, but it was a voluntary tax taken on the basis of religious belief. Now the next, other than that, there were other toll taxes which were collected on the goods which were entering from other places. Similarly, taxes were taken on liquor, on the gambling places where gambling was done. These things such as gambling, alcohol, these are even taxed today at a very higher prices, because these are not necessities and these are not very good habits. So the government even today taxes higher as compared to on other goods. The taxes on these items are much heavier. So some taxes, they were collected from the forests and the mines. So like today, various sources were there, and from all these various sources such as gambling places, alcohols, forest mines, the taxes were collected. Now the question is, where was this money used? So this money was basically used for public welfare. So for construction of roads, for irrigation facility, for building hospitals, or to meet the other expenses of the state, such as to pay the salary of the soldiers. For all these various purposes, these revenues, the money from these revenues were used. So in the examination, 2 type of questions can come from here. discuss the revenue system of the Mauryas. So you will say there were mainly two types of revenues: Bhaga, or the agricultural tax collected at 1/6 of the produce, and Bali, which was a religious tribute. Other than that, toll taxes and taxes on alcohol or gambling houses, forest and mines were also collected. The second question which can come: what was the money from the revenue used for? So the money was used to provide public welfare, such as building of roads, irrigation, hospitals, and also to meet the other expenses of the state, such as to pay the salary of the army. Now, in addition to the revenue, there were military aspect. It had two fold measure. So in the military, first was the actual army which was maintained, which we will do after this, and the other was a spy system. So what is a spy? So a spy is like a secret agent, what you call guptachar in Hindi, a person whose identity, they hide their identity and they go someplace to find out some secret information. So you may ask me, ma'am, why do we have the spy system under the Mauryas? So as you have already studied, the Maurya was a very mighty empire, the almost first of its kind, which was found in India. So in order to run such a big empire, spy system was very necessary, so that what are people's belief inside the empire, or what are people planning and plotting outside the empire, the king needs to know about it. So this spy or a secret agent, they will be inside the empire also, roaming and finding out information. If in some place some people are planning to rebel, then they can inform the king beforehand. Or even in the neighboring countries from the nearby kingdoms also, there can be spies who can give information about their attacks and other things. So the spies, they used to collect information, and the king, they kept a very good bureaucracy, that means a very good administrative system to maintain these spies. That is what is written here, that Chandragupta Maurya had a wide network of spies in his empire, and there were spies against the spies on important matters. More than one agent was asked to collect information. The king was always he always used to keep information of the bureaucracy. So what is the meaning of this line, that there were spies against the spies? So even if one secret agent is finding out something, his information was backed up by another secret agent, to be double sure. So that was the level of efficiency that was maintained in the spy system under the Mauryas. Now the next topic is talking about the military administration of the Mauryan Empire. This is actually a very interesting topic, and it's very evident to you that in order to run such a big empire, a very mighty army, a very strong military pursuit will be needed. So that is why the Mauryan army was very mighty, and it had infantry, cavalry and chariots. So as in the picture you can see, infantry are the soldiers who walk on the feet, cavalry are the ones who ride on the horseback, and you already know that in the picture you can see that there are some war elephants as well. So all of these kind of things, and chariot is what you call rath in Hindi. So all of these things, they were used in the Mauryan army, and Megasthenes in his work Indica has mentioned even the strength of the Mauryan army. So he said that there were 6 lakh infantry, the soldiers who walked on feet. There were 30,000 cavalry, the soldiers who rode on horsebacks, and there were 9,000 war elephants. However, later sources, some of them, they mention that there were 8,000 chariots also. So these were some of the major modes of transportation which were used in warfare in the military, under the military system of the Mauryas. What type of weapons did they use? So as you can see in the picture, they use swords, what you call talwar in Hindi. They use shield to protect themselves in the war, and they used bow and arrow, tir kaman or bow and arrow. So these different type of things, they were used by the Mauryas for fighting in the wars. So this the king happened to be actually the commander-in-chief of the army. He held the highest position, and he had a military commission of 30 members. So there were 30 higher members whom he had appointed as military commissioners, and these 30 military officers, they used to have their own troops, and through this the army became strong. So these 30 military officers, they could be placed all throughout the empire to protect the boundaries from every direction. These the soldiers who were also appointed in the Mauryan military system, they were very efficient, and the recruitment means how to recruit them, how to employ them in the army. So that policy was also very strict. Not anyone could be admitted. The soldiers, they were paid their salary in cash. Like I said, from the revenue, the money which came, that was also helpful in paying the salary of the soldiers. And the Mauryan king, he used to build forts at the strategic, at the very important places for the safety of the empire. So forts were basically built so that from the forts, the people, the troops, they could hide and they could see if somebody is planning to attack, and they could protect and they could defend the empire. So at many such important places, especially in the boundary areas, many forts were built by the Mauryas. So if we discuss the military strength of the Mauryas, you will say that they had a very mighty empire. You will mention the number that there were 6 lakh infantry, 30,000 cavalry, 9,000 war elephants, and 8,000 chariots. And the things were used were bows, weapons, arrows. The king was the supreme commander in chief of the army, and he had 30 member military commission. The soldiers were recruited according to a strict policy and were paid their salary in cash. There were many forts for defense. So this becomes the military system. Now this brings us to the last part of the chapter, which is again very important from examination point of view. Now we are discussing about Ashoka's Dhamma. And many questions come from this area. They may come, what do you understand by Dhamma? Or what were the principles of Dhamma? What was the impact of Dhamma on the Mauryan imperial policy? All of these questions we are going to discuss now. So the first question, what is Ashoka's Dhamma? So in Buddhism, you have already studied the term Dhamma. That Dhamma is the universal order on which the world runs. So Dhamma is the Prakrit form of the Sanskrit word dharm, which is religious duty basically. So this Dhamma was not basically any new religion which was introduced by Ashoka, but it was like a common meeting ground of all the religions of the world. So it consisted of the principles of all the major religions of the world. Things like respecting your elders, being good to your young ones, having tolerance towards others. This is not prescribed by any one particular religion. That is a common point of all the religion. So that is why Dhamma, as it is described in one of the inscriptions found on Ashoka's pillars or edicts, it says that Dhamma is not a religion or a religious system. It is a moral law, it is a code of conduct, it is an ethical order, which is like a common meeting ground of all the religion. So it is just like a belief, it is like a moral value, a moral system. It is a code of conduct which should be followed by all the people because it takes the good principles out of all the religion. So if in the exam I give you a question, what do you understand by Dhamma? You will say Dhamma is a Prakrit form of the Sanskrit word dharm. As described in Ashoka's edicts, Dhamma is not a religion or a religious system, but it is a moral law, a common code of conduct, or an ethical order, which is a common meeting ground of all the religion. For 2 marks, this is a very important question. Now the second part, like I said, we are now talking about the principles of Dhamma. So since it is not a religion, but it is like a moral value, it is like a thing which is prescribed by all religions. Some of the things are very basic, which we teach you in moral science also. So you know that it is important for you to respect your elders, your teachers. You have to love children and people who are younger than you. So that type of respect for parents, elders, teachers, that was prescribed, and love for children. Secondly, if you remember that Dhamma is basically extracted from Buddhism. So some of the principles of Dhamma will be somewhat similar to Buddhism. So actually point 2, 3 and 5 you have studied under Buddhism. It is easy for you to remember. So you remember one of the major principles of Buddhism was ahimsa or non-violence. So Dhamma also propagated non-violence. That means not causing any injury to anyone. Similarly, you remember that in Buddhism we had studied about karma, our actions, that if our karma is good, then we will get happiness in our next birth, or we will be free from the cycle of birth and rebirth. So similar principle Dhamma had, that good deeds or good karma can give us happiness in the next birth. And like Buddhism, it also disapproved of any empty rituals. They did not believe in performing rites and rituals for attaining salvation. They believed in more on moral conduct, having a good moral conduct. So these 3 are very similar to Buddhism. And the last one, because Ashoka was a very tolerant person, through Dhamma he taught the people to respect all religion. They may follow any religion, but we should be tolerant towards other religion. So these are the 5 principles of Dhamma. It may come as a 3-mark question. So if I ask you what are the principles of Dhamma? Respect for elders and love for children, ahimsa or non-violence, good deeds or good karma would give happiness to man in the next birth. He taught people to respect all the religions, and he disapproved all empty rituals. Now the last part of the chapter is the impact of Dhamma. Where is this impact on Ashoka's policy? How did Dhamma impact the policies that were taken by Ashoka. So, firstly, it led to religious unity among the people, because one of the major principles of Dhamma is that it taught the people to respect all the other religions. So naturally, people of different religion, they started following Dhamma and they became tolerant. So there was a policy of religious tolerance in the kingdom. Now, again, like I said, Dhamma is more like a moral values. It is more like a conduct, a moral law. So, naturally, following of Dhamma will bring people under good moral values and they will start leading a good, decent moral life. So, that is the second impact, moral values. People under the influence of Dhamma started living a moral life. Naturally, if you start living a moral life, there will be reduction or end in crimes. So that is why, because Dhamma is propagating, it is spreading that we should do ahimsa or non-violence. So automatically there will be a good moral impact on the people and it will reduce illegal activities. They will almost end. And the last one, if people are not doing anything wrong, they are leading a moral life, they can focus more on things which matter, things such as public welfare. So you remember that since after the Kalinga war, Ashoka had stopped any war or conquest. So there were many such things that came to an end, the negative things, and even the prisoners of war, they were used for agricultural and economic work. So because of that, a number of public welfare things such as planting of trees, making of roads, and many such public work schemes, they were developed in the Mauryan period, which brought about a lot of economic prosperity and helped people in leading a peaceful life. So basically, if I ask you what was the impact of Dhamma on Ashoka's policy? So the four things you will explain are religious unity, moral life, end of crimes, and public welfare. For 3 or 4 marks, you will explain these in one line each. So today's class was also very important, and with this we have finished the chapter, the Mauryan Empire. In the next class, we will probably do the question answers of this chapter. So when we are talking, we have just discussed the district administration and the administration of cities today. We have talked about the different revenue systems. We have discussed Bhaga and Bali. What was the money of the revenue used for? We have talked about the spy system, which was very efficient, the very mighty Mauryan army we have discussed. And finally, we have discussed what was Ashoka's Dhamma, what were its principles, and what was the impact of this Dhamma. One just negative impact of Dhamma was that it led to decrease of military preparedness. So since there were no wars, the army it became very lax, and gradually successors of Ashoka were weak and they could not handle. So there were revolts and rebellions inside the entire kingdom which were happening throughout the empire, and because of that, with time, the entire Mauryan empire it collapsed and it ended. So this was the chapter. I hope it's clear to all of you.